Reading with your child is the best way that you can promote learning at home. And reading to your child is pretty straightforward. But what happens when your child starts to read to you? You've given up the responsibility of who's reading, but you're taking on new responsibilities. The responsibilities of monitoring and supporting them as they read. Today we're going to explore how you can monitor and support your child in their reading by talking about the 3 things that I do as a teacher anytime a child is reading to me. Starting with the most obvious but maybe the most difficult for some, and that is to be in the moment. Being present is incredibly important because it allows us to notice the strengths and the weaknesses of a child's reading. It's also very difficult because at any moment, one of 1,000 things could take us out of the moment. As a teacher, I can completely empathize with this. I have 17 other kids in the classroom that could at any moment take me out of being present with the one I'm reading with. As a parent, you might have a similar problem. Maybe you have more than one child and another child comes up to you with a problem. Bam, out of the moment. Other things can take you out of the moment too. Maybe you had a bad day or heard some bad news and you can't get that thought off of your mind. Or maybe you have your phone or your smartwatch on you and it keeps dinging at you as you're reading with your child. So how do we make sure we're being in the moment? Well, first, mindfulness is a skill, and like any other skill, it takes time and practice to get better at it. But in the meantime, something more immediate that you can do is to set yourself up for success. Limit the distractions that you might have. Looking at those examples earlier, if you have more than one child, make sure that your other child or children are doing something that they can do independently. And that's going to look different depending on the age and the interest of your child. If you had a bad day or heard some bad news, you can practice some healthy mental habits to take that thought off of your mind, at least temporarily. Something I like to do is to zoom out and look at things from a bigger perspective just to see how big my problem really is, or maybe how small it actually is. You could also practice something like gratitude, because being thankful for the things that are going well in your life can help put the bad things in perspective. Or maybe it's just sharing it with a significant other or a loved one so that you have someone who can share that burden with you and maybe think about it while you have to focus on something else. Finally, if your phone is a distraction for you, put that phone in another room, take the smartwatch off, and if you feel that you can't do that for 10 minutes because you're waiting on a text or a phone call, then maybe that's just not the right time to be reading with your child. Being present also has the added benefit of making the time more enjoyable for both you and your child because you'll be more engaged. So now you're having learning time and quality time. That's a win-win. The second thing I do whenever a child reads to me is to focus on phonics first. Phonics are the building blocks of how we read and write. And if a child can't decode or sound out a word, then they can't make any meaning of that word. It's just a jumbled mash of letters on the page. At school, we talk about the idea of how children first learn to read so that they can read to learn. And that's the ultimate goal. We want children to be able to learn as they're reading and become independent learners. When you're focusing on phonics, you're going to be monitoring the sounds that they do and don't know, and then you're also going to be supporting them as they learn new sounds. Monitoring is going to be you observing your child as they're reading to you. And say you notice that your child doesn't know the sound that ing makes. They keep messing up that sound when they come to words that have ing. You've monitored and noticed that your child is having a tough time with ing. Now, how do you support that? You support that through simple phonics lessons. And I mean it when I say simple. It doesn't have to be some extravagant thing that you do to support phonics. So here's what I would do if I noticed a child had a tough time with ing. I'm going to start by taking the words out of context, putting them onto a piece of paper or a paper-sized whiteboard so that they can see those words in isolation. When words are in context, they become a bit trickier because there's a lot of other things that they have to focus on as well. When they're isolated and out of context, they can focus purely on just that sound. So I'm going to start by writing 3 words that are common ing words. Words like sing and ring, and maybe if I want to show that it can come at the end of a word like running. Then I'm going to be intentional about modeling how to read those words. I'm going to start with the first one, and I'm going to say ing, ring. I'm going to model how I can isolate those 2 sounds and then smoothly blend it into the word. And then I'm going to tell the child that ing says ing, and I'm going to ask them if they can say ing. Once they can say ing, Then we're going to move on to the next one. They're now listening, they're watching, and they're even starting to speak out as well. So the next word is sing, s-ing, and then I'm going to smoothly blend it, sing. And then I'm going to bounce the question over to the child. ING says what? And hopefully they'll be able to say ing. If they can't, that's okay. Keep practicing until they understand that ING says ing. Once they do, add 3 more words. 3 words like wing, sting, and fling. And then give the child the opportunity to read those words out of context. Once they kind of have a general idea of the sound that ING makes, move back to in context and continue to monitor. Is your child going to pick this up and put it in their long-term memory storage the first time that they do a little lesson like this? Probably not. But with consistency over time, these things will shift from that short-term memory into the long-term memory where it's going to be locked and good to go. A great resource that I would recommend using is the phonics progression from literacyhub.edu. I'm having it up on the screen right now as I'm talking, and it breaks down sounds into different levels and kind of gives you ideas of the order in which children should be learning the sounds of phonics, and it'll give you some ideas of maybe some next steps for your child as well. You could also even use it as a bit of a checklist. As you're monitoring your child's reading, you can kind of check off the sounds that you know that they know and sounds that maybe you're not sure if they know. And those can be the sounds that maybe you do some mini phonics lessons when you read with your child. If you have any questions about this phonics progression or anything that I talk about in this video, please feel free to reach out to me via email or one of my social media accounts. I love to hear from you, and I want to be able to help so that you can support your child. The third thing that I do anytime a child is reading to me is to ask questions. Asking questions is how we promote a deeper understanding. And when we ask questions to children, it gets them to think about the book in a different way, and eventually will help them learn to ask questions themselves. People have written entire books about asking questions. I could make an entire video series about asking questions, but I'm going to try and keep it as simple and overarching as possible, and then give you some ideas of where to start with your questioning. So first, let's talk about the 3 levels of questions. When reading, there's 3 levels of questions that you can ask. There are the word and sentence level questions, there are the text level questions, and then there's beyond the text questions. Let's start by talking about the simplest and lowest level of those questions, and that's the word or sentence level questions. These are going to be questions about the word choice that an author uses or a phrasing that an author uses in a text. A great example of this is you're reading with your child and you come to the word terrified. You can ask your child, do you know what that word means? If they don't know what that word means, it's a great opportunity to practice using context clues, using the words around that word to try and figure out what that word means. If your child does know the word terrified, it's a great opportunity to ask the question of, why do you think the author used that word, instead of just using scared? And that gets them thinking about how certain words carry certain gravity and why we use certain words in situations and other words in other situations. Moving on to the second level of questions, we have the text questions. These are questions about the whole text itself. It could be for fiction books, questions about who are the characters, what's the setting, what's the problem or solution, is there a theme for this story, is there a moral or a lesson that we can learn? For nonfiction texts, it's going to be questions about the main idea. What's the main idea? What are the details of this text that kind of build up to that main idea? It could be questions about text features. What does the glossary tell us? How do we find out what page a piece of information is by using the table of contents? It could be comparing and contrasting questions, looking at 2 pieces of information from the text and saying what's the same about these 2 things and what's different about these 2 things. Having to re-record this part, but the highest level is those beyond the text questions. These are questions that will help children make connections outside of the text. So it might be a connection from the text to themselves, where you'll ask a question like, have you felt the same way that a character feels in the story? Or have you had a similar problem to a character in the story? Or maybe you're reading a nonfiction text about tigers and you're asking them questions like, have you seen a tiger before? Maybe they've been to the zoo, or what do you already know about tigers? Making a connection to their background knowledge. Another type of connection that can be made is a text-to-text connection. You might ask questions about how one text is similar or different from another text that they've read. In fiction books, these could be comparing and contrasting the story elements like the characters, the settings, the plot, the theme, the lesson that can be learned. In a fiction book, it might be comparing pieces of information or maybe how that information is shared and asking questions about comparing and contrasting two books, so that way they can get a more well-rounded view of a certain topic by seeing it from multiple sources. The final type of connection that can be made is a text-to-world connection, and sometimes these are the toughest connections to make because they require us to look at things from a bigger perspective. You might ask your child if a book reminds them of something that happened in history, like a specific historical event, or how this book connects to a certain culture or a natural phenomena that happens in the world, or even a religious and philosophical ideology. With all these different types of questions that you can ask, you might be wondering when to ask certain questions and why would I ask this question here and not this question there, and well, that's a long process. I will tell you that asking questions like mindfulness is a skill, and the more you practice it, the better you're going to get. But at first, my recommendation would be to ask questions that promote your thought process. As your child's reading to you, notice the thoughts that are going through your mind and ask questions that will kind of lead your child or guide your child to that type of thinking. As you learn to understand your child's thought process more, and as you become more competent in asking questions, you will then be able to start asking some questions that you know will engage and challenge your child's perspective, with the ultimate goal of your child eventually being able to ask themselves their own questions that will come from different perspectives so that they can get a well-rounded idea of a certain concept or topic. Just make sure you don't beat yourself up for asking bad questions, because you will ask bad questions. If I beat myself up every time I asked a bad question as a teacher, I would no longer be a teacher. I have asked so many bad questions. It's just ridiculous. And the big advantage you have over me is that you don't get new students every year or new children every year. At least I hope you don't. You keep the same ones every year so that you can develop a deeper understanding of that child. And again, as I mentioned earlier, ask questions that will engage and challenge their perspective. I want to close out this video before it goes too long, but before I do, I want to give you a couple of encouragements. Number one is to try and read with your child every single day, even if it's just for 5 to 10 minutes. Because as I mentioned at the top of this video, reading with your child is the best way that you can promote learning at home. My second encouragement would be to model a joy for reading yourself. If you already enjoy reading, model that and be intentional about showing that to your child, and they'll be more likely to pick up on that. If you don't already like reading, then I want you to go on a little journey, go to the library with your child, look at some different books, and try and find something that might interest you. You might not find it on the first or second or 15th book, but I promise you there is something out there for everybody. I used to not like reading. I thought I was a bad reader. I didn't enjoy it. I was slow. But once I found that I enjoyed reading certain types of fiction books and certain types of comics, I fell in love with reading, and I try and read most every day. And I make sure that I carry that joy of reading over to my students whenever I'm at school as well. So remember, as you shift that responsibility of reading over to your child and you start to pick up those new responsibilities of monitoring and supporting, make sure that you are being in the moment, focusing on phonics first, and asking questions. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know as parents you have 1,000,007 other things that you could be doing instead of watching this video, but you've taken the time to learn how you can monitor and support your child as they read to you, and I hope that you're able to take something away from this video, that you're able to feel empowered after watching this video so that you can go and support your child with their reading. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. I'm going to be starting to come out with more videos again here in the near future. Thank you again for watching. I hope you have a great day. Keep learning, keep growing, and until next time.